I wish that people understood that drag is a way of expression.
Wow! This flag is called the non-binary pride flag, the lesbian flag, the transgender pride flag.
So cool! Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
If you're a Canadian parent and you have a problem with this stuff being taught to kids, then you might be put on a CSIS watch list and be considered a violent extremist, according to a new policy. The Canadian government is also trying to pass Bill C-63, which could fine you, censor you online, or criminalize you for hate speech for simply speaking out on this topic. Now, at the front lines of this war against parents is the Canadian AntiHate network. If you're a parent simply trying to protect your kids from gender ideology in schools, then AntiHate will smear your reputation and try to, ironically, get you hated among your community and among your peers. We're making a documentary exposing this group and their twisted ideas and tactics of attacking Canadian parents. There's a link down here if you want to donate to that. But in the meantime, here's a clip from our upcoming documentary.
AntiHate has peculiar and oddly specific criteria for what it considers hate. Any statement that opposes or even questions giving drugs like puberty blockers to children is deemed by them as transphobic hate.
Puberty blockers, which are completely reversible, we can put that pause on puberty, just like if you were listening to music, you put the pause on and we stop the blockers and puberty would go right back to where it was.
You can just pause puberty.
No, you can't. No, you can't. How many studies do they have, long-term studies, on hormone blockers with children? None.
14-year-old daughter was put on blockers. They discovered after 2 years, this 14-year-old girl has osteoporosis. That's something that like old women get.
The Canadian AntiHate Network is not interested in having an honest debate of any kind. They're much more preoccupied with smearing people's reputations, calling them homophobe and transphobe, etc. You see, they dishonestly frame this entire topic to be all about hating trans people as opposed to what it really is, which is parents protecting kids from harmful ideas.
It's the same age-old conspiracy theory that queer people are pedophiles and are coming after your children. They're just rehashing it and use it against the trans community.
Of course, it doesn't help that the Canadian AntiHate Network gets featured in the news a lot. It gives them a lot of credibility. And as you can imagine, the Canadian news is also complicit in this war against parents, as they are entirely one-sided when they cover this topic.
Many experts say the drugs are life-saving, a crucial treatment for youth in distress.
For my daughter to experience male puberty would be devastating.
I've had patients who refuse to eat or sleep until they're able to move ahead with intervention.
What do you say to the claim that, well, we have to do this for these kids because if we don't, they'll kill themselves. They'll resort to drugs and self-harm.
A lot of them were hurting themselves. A lot of them were suicidal before they even discovered gender. That is never part of the discussion. And they say, what would you rather have? A living daughter or a dead son? If this is what the professionals are saying, it's terrible emotional blackmail.
Using puberty blockers is supposedly part of gender-affirming care, which is deceptively named to define the attempted halting of the natural progression of puberty for a young person. Gender-affirming care ranges from giving children puberty blockers all the way up to and including full-on genital mutilation for transgender surgeries. This is all for underage minors. These insane ideas fall under the umbrella of sexual orientation and gender ideology, or SOGI for short. The SOGI legislation being implemented in Canadian schools forces teachers to hide facts about students transitioning from their parents, among many other unprecedented policies.
In practice, this means that teachers must refer to children by their new name and pronoun when at school, even if they are very young, but then switch back to the original name and pronoun when communicating with parents. I feel that this policy puts teachers in an ethical dilemma of having to lie to a parent or disobey the school board's directive. It also excludes parents from their own role of providing loving guidance to their child on a very complex and serious topic. I am worried that some of the new books in our libraries might influence children to make that hasty decision. For example, the book Seeing Gender states, children should be believed when they state that they are a gender other than the sex they were assigned at birth. And they should be believed if they want to change their gender the next day. This book presents the idea that there is no need to discuss these ideas with your parents before you declare your new gender identity, no benefit in waiting to be sure or researching future consequences before making this decision. The message to kids seems to be full speed ahead.
Students, teachers, school board trustees, parents, religious leaders, concerned citizens, anyone opposing this behavior or the gender ideology as a whole is considered to be promoting hate and likely to be targeted by AntiHate.ca. Prominent activist Billboard Chris has been targeted and smeared by AntiHate.
They wrote an article about me. They've written about 4, I think, but they wrote this article on me. They've misrepresented me a bit, misrepresented my past. Just wrote an article that I was a hateful person and all that. For the longest time, it was the #1 Google search item for me, if you Googled my name. So people want to know who Chris Elston is or Billboard Chris, that's what would come up. It's just used to silence people and to scare others from speaking up, because when they bully you like that, it does scare other people. And I do know others who they have written about where it's affected their job. There was a man who's a nurse in Ontario who came out with me on the street. And they actually wrote to his employer. And they also doxed his wife, who did work with the Ontario police, even though she had nothing to do with this gentleman standing with me. But he went on stress leave and sued them because, you know, they're going after his employment. It is stressful for a lot of people. Not everyone can do what I do because they have jobs and it might impact their employment.
The Canadian Women's Sex-Based Rights has been targeted and smeared by AntiHate.
All of us here could reasonably expect to end up on a CSIS watch list just for being in this room tonight. This is also a country where unserious people start unserious organizations like the Canadian AntiHate Network, and they receive government funding to monitor political dissidents like us.
Countless other outspoken school board trustee candidates have been targeted and smeared by AntiHate. They all have one thing in common: opposing SOGI education. The leaders of teachers' unions like CUPE, the Canadian Union of Public Employees, the largest union in Canada, have used AntiHate as a source in order to organize and mobilize against protesters condemning SOGI. In these leaked Zoom calls, members of CUPE union used the term anti-fascist, refer to AntiHate.ca, and allude to knowing activists who will help intimidate concerned parents, including recording the license plate numbers of protesters who oppose SOGI education and giving puberty blockers to children.
When they are gathering for their tailgate party in the mall parking lot, we've got a couple of seasoned activists who've already said that they're willing to go over and, you know, take some pictures of license plates and make sure that they know that they're being watched, that they're not doing this in secret, that people are noticing what they're up to.
During some of these demonstrations, protesters opposing SOGI education were violently attacked by a mob standing side by side with the president of the CUPE union, Fred Hahn.
Fred, does CUPE stand shoulder to shoulder with Antifa?
It's weird when people ask me about Antifa because, like, do you think we're pro-fascist? That's weird. Okay, we're done.
So you do?
Do you think we're pro-fascist? That's weird.
CUPE, the largest union in Canada, takes cues from AntiHate.ca. CUPE may be collaborating with a violent group, Antifa, and the Canadian media seems to cover protests like this about concerned parents in a very one-sided light. At the center of all of this madness is AntiHate, who lies about the truth of this gender ideology education, and they actively vilify and promote the hatred of Canadian citizens who oppose the drugging and genital mutilation of children.
They have also targeted my community. They've sent mail to, I don't even know how many houses, but hundreds for sure, all around my house, telling them lies about me, writing where I live. It was postage paid. To houses at least several streets away from me. So I don't know who sent it, but it was linking to AntiHate.ca's smear piece about me. If you look at the journalists who write for AntiHate.ca and you look up their bios, which I've done, it all says anti-fascist in their bios. They're all Antifa. These are Antifa journalists being funded by our federal government. They're using them as their brown shirts to do their dirty work because they don't want to do it themselves.
This war against parents is far from over. The Canadian AntiHate Network received over $400,000 in funding this year alone. And you can bet that money is going to go towards vilifying parents who are trying to protect their children. I started SaveFreeSpeech.ca to stand up for parents and Canadians who are being bullied and attacked by Canadian institutions and organizations like the Canadian AntiHate Network. If you want to support our mission and help this documentary reach as many people as possible, then please go to givesendgo.com/savefreespeech. Thank you so much for your support.
Our Prime Minister thinks that lesbians can have penises and that children can consent to infertility and having their sexual organs lopped off. He thinks that it is hateful to challenge these bad, terrible, atrocious ideas, and that makes him a dangerous man for this country.